Have you ever wondered why you don't see cheat codes the way you used to? Well, stay tuned for the answers. So back in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't find a game that didn't have a cheat code or that you couldn't exploit in some way. But today, very few games have them. And if they do, it's an intentional add-on by game developers. So what happened to these cheat codes? Well, first, we need to understand how they came about. Cheat codes were initially tools used to help developers test later parts of the game without first playing through the whole story, right? So they develop a game, they want to skip around a little bit, they don't want to have to play through the whole thing, so hey, let's make a code to help skip us around, right? Or help give us some sort of advantage to get through this part of the game easier so we can figure out what we need to fix or what the problems are. So that's why they develop these codes, these cheat codes. Now, to the everyday player, the logical thing would be for developers to take the code out before they release the final version of the game, thereby preventing players from exploiting the game itself. However, many developers, they treated these almost but not quite finished games very delicately, meaning they didn't want to take cheats out during the final days of testing because they may still need the codes for some reason, right? Similarly, when they thought the games were finished, they didn't want to go back in and try to take the codes out and take the chance of accidentally breaking the game just days before release of the game to the public, which I guess could be problematic if you're on a tight deadline, right? Now, sometimes developers would just blatantly forget that they put the codes in there, right? Or blatantly forget to take them out. And to our benefit, of course, to the player's benefit, because we could have all sorts of fun with codes like that. Around the mid-'80s or so, we really started to see developers use these cheat codes to their advantage, right? And a good example of this was the game developer Konami. They had intentionally put the same code in many of their games. However, the code would produce a slightly different effect depending on the game, but the code itself is the same for the player, right? I put the same key buttons in, or same buttons on my keypad in, or my controller in, and then an effect will happen within the game. Now, they use this as somewhat of a marketing tool for their games, meaning, knowledge of the code kind of piqued the curiosity of the consumer, so they'd go out and want to get the game just so they could try the code. Kind of a neat marketing strategy, marketing tool. However, most developers would use different codes for each game, right? You write a whole new code for a game. We need to update our code as we go along. And honestly, that was a measure to prevent people exploiting their games so they could play them as the developers intended. Now, the fun for many gamers was to try to figure out what these codes were that were put into these games. That's right, some developers didn't release their codes. When they found out that they had a code in there, they didn't release it to the public. So it took the you or I's of the world trial and error to figure some of them out, which is kind of neat. Now, other game publishers, they had no problem releasing the secrets, releasing the codes for the game. A lot of times they give these codes out with review copies of the games to various article publishers or reviewers, game reviewers that would work with these magazines that would always look at games before they came out and give their opinion on the game. They'd give them the cheat codes and the secrets to the game just to help them get through it easier and help them digest the game a little better. Most of the time, these game publishers didn't have an issue with the reviewers sharing the secrets and codes in some sort of publication article. However, many did request that you release these codes and/or secrets after the game has already been released, or after your review of the game has already been released. That way they could have an opportunity, or that way the consumer would go out and buy the game to buy the game, not to exploit it, but go out and buy the game so we can use it, or so they can play it as it's intended before the code's released. That has to do with marketing, making sure that they get the most, or the best possible return on the developer's investment for that game, right? You don't tell them how to skip through the game real fast, and whatnot. Right off the bat, they won't want to play the game then. Now in at the late 80s and early 90s, there was this wonderful, wonderful little device that came along called the Game Genie. Now the Game Genie, it changed all the rules in regards to cheat codes, right? And honestly, it was what led to a lot of the way game developers built games. It changed the way that's really it. It changed the way a lot of game developers built games in the future. Now, the Game Genie, you didn't have to have cheat codes for a Game Genie to find a way to cheat a game, right? So basically, built-in cheats weren't the limit to bending and breaking the rules of the game anymore. The Game Genie, it went above and beyond by offering these cheats that developers never intended to pack in their games. It acted kind of as a spoofing/bridge device. So players would attach a cartridge from their game back in the 80s and early 90s, attach that cartridge into the Game Genie, and then the Game Genie would go into the console. Now now the connection that would occur between the game and the consoles, it allowed the device to override the game's processes with its own instructions based on a code entered by the player during the startup sequence. That's crazy, right? But you notice, I said we still needed a code to make this thing work, right? Well, where do these codes come from? Well, the Game Genie's engineers, the people that built the Game Genie, put it together, they were really responsible for discovering hundreds and hundreds of codes made available to us, the public. They would do this by using some of their lab equipment or whatnot to kind of figure out where the weak points and the weak spots in the games were. I don't fully understand it. I'm not even trying to understand it or explain it, but they're the ones that are responsible. Now, they would manipulate the game values directly. Essentially, that's what we're doing with the Game Genie. We're manipulating the game values directly, meaning that devices like that Game Genie were only limited to the engineers' imaginations, or what they could do was only limited to their imagination. As long as they could find, a little path for the information to go through to change the game. I mean, that was it. It took a lot of trial and error, but they figured it out. It was really the ultimate cheat device. You created codes where there were no codes. Kind of neat. Now, something that as we progressed into the mid 90s, and we started going away from the cartridge games, we started getting into these disc games. Now, up until this point, most developers most game developers, like I was saying earlier, a lot of them had cheat codes in their games, and the Game Genie just made it even crazier for the developers, right? Or crazier for the players, because we could do all sorts of neat things. The NES was really the only ones that, Nintendo were really the only ones that didn't already bake their own codes into games. Not intentionally. They did a pretty good job of taking them out before release, but Game Genie kind of stopped, made it so it didn't matter. We could make stuff up, and we could get in there, and we could do all sorts of crazy things with their games. So as we progressed towards those mid 90s, as we started switching towards CD-ROMs, that made the ability of something like the Game Genie and or these people that are trying to cheat and hack the games kind of almost impossible at the time. And in order to actually cheat a game towards those mid to late 90s, when these CD-ROM based systems came out, we had to actually go in and solder hardware into our game console in order to play, cracked games, as we call them, copied games or computer games, like the PlayStation. The original PlayStation was big about that. You could if you knew somebody that knew how to do it, or you could get a little chip, have it soldered in, and all of a sudden you had tons of games. Even on the Xbox, and you could have a whole bunch of games loaded on there, too. You could load the games into the systems themselves and have them stored in there, some sort of little hard drive, right? A lot of people were doing that back in the day. Now, you had to be kind of tech savvy or know somebody who was tech savvy to be able to do that. Now, the crazy thing is, the developers, again, they still want you to play the games as they intended to be developed. So, once these consoles that come out and were able to connect to the internet, I mean, that was it. We were done. Cheat codes were essentially no more unless the developer intended it to be there, right? All they have to do is send out a game patch, and they've just effectively neutered any cheat devices. Even if you put a chip in your console, they send the ping out, over the internet, and it comes back that, hey, your console something's wrong with it. They're shutting that sucker down right away. It happened to a number of buddies of mine with their Xbox 360s back in the day when they get those modded. All of a sudden, their Xbox Live accounts are no more. They shut them down because they were cheating, or they were using non-licensed equipment or something like that. But it really was, connecting to the internet really was a significant decline in cheat codes. Now, cheat codes, that void that was left by cheat codes going away, it was filled by the game developers in the form of achievements and trophies. So like achievements you have on the Microsoft has achievements, and Sony has the trophies on the PlayStation. They wanted to kind of reverse roles. It used to be the cool, fun thing to see if we could get around the developer. How do we get past the developer? How can we undo their work with the cheat code? Well, now it's all of a sudden it's cool to play through the game in its entirety and get all the achievements before we start messing with things, because now we got mods and all sorts of other stuff we can do to games. But before we start messing with the game, it's cool, it's fun, it's a point of pride to get through the game as it's intended, get all the achievements, right? Big point of pride. So they changed the narrative. The game developers changed the narrative on what was cool for the consumer to do, right? And that was really smart on their part to do that. So, I mean, cheat codes, no more. You're really not going to find them. There are a few examples, that you can still use them. Grand Theft Autos and a couple other games, you can put codes in to get unlimited weapons, unlimited life, flying cars, all sorts of stuff like that, But those are intended by the game developer. Any unwanted cheat codes anymore, it's very rare to find them, unfortunately. But that's the history of cheat codes and why we don't see them anymore. I hope everybody appreciated this information and this knowledge dump I threw on you. Please join us again for another episode. Y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.